The article from Karin Snel, Patrick Witte, Thomas Hartmann and Stan Geertman investigates the role of homeowners in protecting themselves from flooding. The central point made by the authors is that in order to achieve the so-called flood resilience, homeowners need to change their position in this task from recipients to active participative stakeholders. Let's start looking at the context for this discussion. If you're from the Netherlands, you know how governments traditionally protect you from floods, with dikes and dams. At the same time, with this centralized approach, citizens are disconnected from the planning of flood risk management. People in Holland traditionally trust their government to provide a public service loaded with technology and very expensive to keep their feet dry. But as experience show, structural measures alone are not sufficient to prevent floods from causing damage to people. Therefore, there has been an increased understanding that non-structural measures should also be part of protection against flood. An example is the river basin-wide approach, where non-governmental stakeholders are also involved in the planning process. Perhaps you know the project Room for the River in Nijmegen. So over time, there has been a transition from traditional flood protection to a flood risk management, which encompass a new flood risk governance. In this governance approach, the participation and active involvement of non-governmental stakeholders in the decision-making process of flood risk management is very important. The central question asked in the paper is, why should homeowners be more involved in flood risk governance? The article then lays out the main arguments that are found in current literature for the growing involvement of homeowners in flood risk governance. I am sure you all read the articles in detail. So let's take a quick look into each of the argument categories, which the authors compiled and organized into 4 categories in a very nice graphic. The first of all, it's our famous climate change. Climate change means more and bigger floods, which means that traditional protection measures are not going to be sufficient. This is a macro scale argument at the collective level and the most often used argument. The second category of arguments is to minimize flood damage. That is very easy to understand. If water don't come in your house and it doesn't damage your stuff, you save money becoming more resilient. If everyone does that together with adaptation measures, they minimize flood damage in the micro scale and in a collective level. The third category is also in the micro scale, but at the individual level. As many houses are privately owned, the owners are responsible and sometimes the only person capable of taking action to prevent flooding. Owners can do simple things, like increasing permeable surfaces in their gardens to help managing flood risk, especially caused by heavy rains in this case. And the last category, which look at the individual actions at the macro scale, is the changing responsibility of the individuals in this task of flood protection. The authors make the point that as state power and budget to implement public services get smaller, homeowners have to become aware of their own responsibility in protecting their houses and themselves. This is about the division of responsibility among the state and the private actors. The conclusion of the article is that in a flood risk governance approach, homeowners should become actively involved in flood risk management by implementing adaptation measures themselves. This increased participation of homeowners as self-motivated actors to take adaptation measures is considered the latest shift in flood governance, and the authors name it flood resilience. This concept of flood resilience proposes, among other things, 3 capacities in relation to flooding. First, capacity to resist floodings. 2, capacity to observe and recover from floodings. And 3, capacity to transform and adapt. The authors close by saying that this latest paradigmatic shift from flood risk management to flood resilience should bring together new possibilities for homeowner involvement in flood risk governance, beyond academic and policy domain, but also in practice in real life. This increased participation and shared responsibility will strengthen the civil society corner of the governance triangle.